Welcome to Generations at Work, where our goal is to build bridges, not walls, between the different generations in the workplace. Today, we're going to explore a topic that sometimes can be an elephant in the room in the workplace. Let's have an important conversation around mental health and how it affects the different generations at work. Before we get started, if you're interested in learning more about how to lead the different generations in the workplace, or perhaps you want a workshop or a coaching for your team to raise the leadership lid of your organization, please visit maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. We've also have an added value to you. We've created a downloadable free Generations at Work playbook that you can also access at maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. I'm your host, Susan Davis, and with me today, our generational expert, Dr. Tim Elmore, an international speaker and author of over 35 best-selling titles. Tim is an expert in equipping leaders to engage young team members and lead multiple generations in the workplace. He's the author of A New Kind of Diversity, Making Your Different Generations on Your Team a Competitive Advantage. And you can pick that book up at maxwellleadership.com. And that's really what we want to talk about in this podcast. How do we make your teams a competitive advantage? Welcome, Tim.
Thank you, Susan. It's always good to be with you. And
Absolutely.
your
Well, I'm
bright smile
excited
there. Yeah,
about this topic today because sometimes this topic is an elephant in the
yeah,
room. You
it
know,
really is. Yeah. In fact,
it,
I would say it's not only something we're not quite sure how to talk about, it's especially true between generations.
mm, mm,
Olders tend to stereotype the young as, gosh, you wimps. Come on, suck it up, buttercup, that sort of thing. And yet, the younger who are really genuinely struggling sometimes with mental health issues are not feeling safe to bring it up. So I'm glad you're hosting this, Susan. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
yeah, it's been one of those things that it's been a taboo, if you will, in the
Yeah,
workplace. And
yeah,
there's this stigma around mental health that, let's not talk about it so that people then don't go seek or get guidance. I do feel like there's been a shift in perspective, and I really want to talk about that today and understanding that mental health is just as important as physical health. In fact, mental health is increasingly viewed as critical to organization success and increased productivity and morale and overall performance. So I really want to get your expertise and how has over the time, and especially during your research, how have the views on mental health in the workplace evolved over time? And how do they change with each generation?
yeah. Well, just like I hinted at before, I think older generations would look at it a little differently. And I'm one of them, need to kind of upgrade and update our view of this, that it isn't just a lack of grit. Sometimes it is, but a lot of times it's not. So I think the first step we need to take, Susan, this is just me, but I think we need to I think we need to realize this is a thing. Um,
Mm,
I would even admit, as recent as 25 years ago, I was leading a new organization and I just thought, man, let's go, let's get to work. And of course, I'd been mentored by John C. Maxwell, who
mhm.
who's Mr. Positive, and you don't bring a problem unless you have a solution, and you don't tell him you're depressed. I'm kidding, but you know what I'm saying. It's like, okay,
Absolutely.
let's just keep a good attitude here. So let me share some data that might be a little wake-up call to listeners.
Okay.
The latest data from the Department of Health and Human Services tells us 76%, that's 3 out of 4, of US workers reported at least one symptom of a mental health condition. 84%, 8 out of 10 of respondents said their workplace conditions have contributed to at least one mental health
Mm.
problem that they've got. And 81%, 8 out of 10, are saying they're going to be looking for workplaces that better foster good mental health. So if it's not on the radar, we need to make sure it is, regardless of your perspective or worldview or keep a good attitude mindset. We've got to realize this is a thing for many, many people.
And I do think there are people that still think it's not. I was with a team not long ago, and we brought up mental health, and people were like, "Well, that's not really a big issue." And one of the gentlemen raised his hand and he said, "I had someone last week tell me they wanted to commit suicide
Yeah,
as
yeah,
a manager." And
yeah.
so it is out there. It is definitely out there, and something that as leaders we have to be aware of. Do you think there's mental health challenges? Do you think they're different among the different generations?
Yeah, I do. I think we may struggle with anxiety, let's say, maybe even an anxiety disorder, but it might be for different reasons. So, listeners, think with Susan and I for just a minute. Boomers were the first generation where psychologists became an actual industry. There were research psychologists before and certainly therapists, but it
Mm,
wasn't seen as a viable place where you'd spend your career. We began to talk about mental health as a young career person for me as a boomer. But boomers were likely raised by builders or the silent generation who felt like you're going to a therapist. What you want to see a shrink?
something's
We call
wrong,
them
something's wrong.
going to a shrink, that sort of thing. So that's just for crazy people. That was kind of the mindset. So
Mhm.
we pretty much pushed it under the rug for decades. Xers, Susan, this is yours, so you may want to add your comments here,
Mhm.
but they're often seen as a forgotten generation,
Mhm.
sandwiched between maybe young adult children who are still needing their help, but aging parents who might still need their help. So their anxiety might surround, I feel like I'm caretaking for both
Yes.
sides, and they may not feel like they've got permission to even take a day,
Mhm.
PTO day, just to. You want to comment since
Yeah,
this is
I
kind
do
of your
think
generation?
this we're in this weird piece because you're at that point that you do have some people have young children. I'll be 54 and I have young children, but I have aging parents too in their
Yeah,
80s.
yeah,
And so you're being pushed between you have your career, right? Your job, you have your younger children, you might even have grandchildren,
yeah,
and you have aging parents.
yeah,
And so usually it's everybody else that gets taken care of and you're the last person,
yeah.
which then we know what happens and that what that leads to mental health.
It's so true. It's so true.
And Gen X has always just done it. They've just
Yeah,
figured it out and they've done it. So this is what they've done for a long time. And so I do think that sometimes they are that forgotten. I think that's a great way to say it.
yeah. So the millennials, those would be my children's generation, they're young professionals. They're a little bit more open to admit it. The stigma
Mm,
is slowly evaporating. They began to realize that it isn't just for people from poor homes or backgrounds. Both of my kids have struggled with mental health issues,
mhm.
and I think we got a relatively healthy home right now. Two parents, lots of food, plenty of clothes, but it really was has been a difficult challenge for them. Thankfully, the stigma seems to be exiting. And then Gen Zers, real quick, the majority of Gen Zers would say they are struggling.
Mm,
Get this, 82%, according to a Barna Research survey, 82% of Gen Zers say they've suffered from at least one trauma. Now, for some, it might be COVID. It might be,
mhm,
the pandemic and they were coming of age, but it might be a dysfunctional parent or an abusive uncle or something that's much more prevalent today.
mm,
And so I'll tell you a quick story. This is a great illustration, I think, of how older generations can misunderstand younger. Um, Susan, you and I talked about this before, but a young job candidate, 22 years old, was asked by a hiring manager to talk about his experience at work and maybe share a challenge that he was proud of himself for overcoming. He shared the story and she really liked what he said, and so she decided to hire him. Over the phone, her boss calls this young man and says, "We'd like to hire you." And the young man says, "Are you kidding me? I'd never work for that woman. She triggered my PTSD when she asked me that question." So,
wow.
he sees that as legitimate. I'm not making fun. He sees this as a legitimate trigger. She's probably thinking, "Are you kidding me?
Yeah,
If this is what's throwing you, you should not work here. We're about to take on some very tough jobs, and this is no
absolutely.
place for someone like you." So you can see how we're butting heads here.
Well, and so what are some of those big misconceptions, if you will, about
Yeah,
people, just generational mental health awareness among all the generations?
yeah,
There's misconceptions out there because I would have never thought that by
yeah,
asking someone how they feel that could trigger them. So
yeah. It's true. In fact, we would think that that's a wonderful gesture to ask them how
yeah.
they're feeling today. Yeah. So you said something brilliant as you kicked off this podcast, Susan, I think anyway. We all know that physical health is important.
Yeah.
When our body is broken, let's say we break our arm, we know we need to go see a doctor or a surgeon or something to take care of that. it's not been till recently that we feel like mental health has been the same way, but it is.
Yeah,
Mental health is not for the weak necessarily. If our body's broken, we need to take it to a doctor. If our brain or our mental health is at issue, we need to take care of it. And maybe it's professional help. Not always, but sometimes.
yeah.
So we need to see mental health in this way. My daughter is a great example. At 18 years old, I asked her permission to share this. At 18 years old, she had had a pretty good life, done well in public school, was about ready to go off to college, made good grades, had lots of friends, was very involved with extracurricular activities, but she went into a funk. I mean, almost overnight at 18. We all wondered, she wasn't eating,
Yeah,
she wasn't social, and she was typically very social. She wanted to withdraw. She just wanted to spend time in her room. And we weren't really adept at all this, but we thought, boy, she's acting like she's depressed. But we weren't thinking disorder. We were just thinking she was having a depressed
yeah,
day. Well, it went on for days. I remember walking into a room and she was reading her Bible and just trying to make sense of why she was feeling so awful. Well, she needed to be treated and she has taken meds and it's really helped her.
yeah,
Now, I'm not saying we need to rush to meds. That may be our last resort, not first resort. But the fact of the matter is, here's this well-adjusted young adult who is in a great career right now as a counselor, by the way.
yeah.
But she had her own challenges herself, and I'm so glad that she was open and we were open to saying, let's treat this like we're broken. We need to fix this.
So I think that's so important, and I'm glad that your daughter gave permission because I think it gives permission for
Yeah,
people to say, "I suffer from that too." I mean,
yeah,
I feel like almost every high performing person has had some type of mental health crisis,
yeah,
and
yeah,
we need to normalize this discussion because it's okay to say I'm not okay.
yeah, yeah,
And, do you think it's technology or what do you think is impacting the mental health across the different generations? What's
yeah.
what's what's driving this?
Well, I think it's a perfect storm of multiple elements, but technology is probably at the top of the list.
Mhm,
Jonathan Haidt wrote a great book. He's an NYU prof and author called The Anxious Generation. And he
mm,
talks about how the smartphone was a game changer when we went from cell phone to smartphone.
yeah,
And we're just absolutely overwhelmed. And when I say we, it's all of us, but certainly the young person who grew up with this. And all they've known is this smartphone with 10,000 messages a day
mm,
coming at them. So I think that's been a huge issue. But you know what, Susan, you just sparked something in my mind. This is off script, so please
yeah.
forgive me if we want to cut
No,
this short
go
before
yeah,
I go.
go.
The good news is we're more apt to talk about it. The bad news is we've become so familiar with the psychological terminology that we're
Mhm,
self-diagnosing and we're saying, oh, I've got this, that's, and sometimes you're going, no, you're having a tough day. Let's go on. You know what I'm saying? I'd love
yeah.
for you, because I know how you lead and you're a
Well,
tough cookie.
I
Uh,
know, you suck it up, buttercup, right?
yeah,
I mean,
that's
I'm that Gen
right.
X.
That's
So
right.
So how do we this is a great this is off script too, but I think it's a great conversation is how are some of the generations being perceived differently than the
Yeah.
others? Like how are Gen Zs and millennials being perceived and what are the older generations relating to or not relating to?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna be a little anecdotal on this. I've got some general data, but what I've seen, Susan, is something we've talked about before. The young, and let's say that would be under 40, might look at the old, let's say over 40, and say, "You all are absolutely absorbed in your work. Some of you are workaholics."
Mhm.
That term came about with boomers, and so they go, "I don't wanna be like that." So part of their pushback on working too hard or too much, not all, but many, would be, I see the unhealthiness mentally on your
Yeah.
life. You've hurt yourself, you've hurt your family, you've hurt your marriage, etc. Again,
Mhm.
not everyone, but often enough that they would go, I don't want to be like you, Bob, that sort of thing. So
Absolutely.
I do think, Susan, you and I, you're much younger than me, but you and I would be the over 40 group. I think we do need a model for our children and for young employees.
Mhm.
We can cut away from work. We can enjoy a vacation or just some downtime where we're recouping. That does. In fact, I think if we do that well, we're going to be better at work.
Well, and honestly, listen, if you're a good leader, you're the least important person in the room, right?
That's
You're
right.
the least important person.
That's
Everybody
right.
around you is more important. I was on actually earlier today on a coaching call with a new mom, and she is moving into a director role. And
Okay.
she says, I just don't know if I can do it all. And I'm
Mm,
like,
yeah.
you absolutely can do it all. You
Yeah.
can be a mom, you
Yeah.
can be, a director, you can be a nurse, you can do all of these things that you want to do with boundaries and expectations. So, as more even, millennials, Gen Zs are moving into more leadership roles, what do those mental health trends look like? Because I hear this in coaching. I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if
Yeah.
I can. And I'm like, of course you can, but what trends are you seeing?
Well, I do think more and more people are needing to do both the great personal life where there are children involved and spouses involved, but also a very demanding job.
Yeah.
Susan, I don't know if this is true, but it feels to me like as I get out there and speak at companies and businesses and sports teams for that matter, everyone is demanding their soul. I
Mm,
mean, there's not one, just come in 8 to 5, you'll be fine, you can leave, that sort of thing.
mhm.
Now, you and I have talked about this before, but I don't know if we've talked about it in front of our listeners here. I held focus groups with Gen Zers and I asked them their view of work. And they said, I think my boss looks at me in a judgmental way because I leave right at 5. And they're going, why do you leave right at 5? Or do you not care about your job? And the Gen Zers sometimes says, oh, I do, sir, but I leave at 5 because I've got a side hustle. This
Yeah.
job doesn't
Another
pay me
job.
enough to cover my expenses. I have 3 jobs. And I think sometimes we need to reserve judgment on those wimps out there. Maybe they're actually working harder than we are sometimes, and we need to cut them some
Maybe
slack.
get a little curious instead of judgmental with their
Yes.
you know
Yeah.
when you say that, do you think there's some generational blind spots when we talk about burnout, emotional
Yeah.
fatigue, the things that we're seeing right now in the workforce? Do you think there's generational blind spots? Maybe that's one of them.
Yeah, I do. I sure do. Typically, for centuries, dating clear back to Socrates and Plato,
Mm,
adults have felt like the kids of their generation are lazy slackers, they're disrespectful to parents, they're not gonna make it. And then, of course, they do. Now, I will say this. Let me share a quick story, Susan, because I think this might be helpful.
yes.
I mean what I just said. Thousands of years of adults have said the next gen is going to ruin life. They're going to ruin the world. And then, of course, they became the adults who say it about the very next generation.
Next generation, yeah.
I had a university professor approach me after I talked about young adults and Gen Z specifically. And he said, haven't we always said, kids today, kids today, kids today? And yet, look at us. We turned out okay.
Mhm.
And I said, I agree with you on your first statement. I don't agree on the second one. And
Ooh.
he looked at me puzzled. And I said, this is just me, but you're right. We have said forever and ever and ever, kids today, kids today. Are they going to make it? But you just said, look at us. We turned out okay. Did we really? We're
Oh,
wrestling with
good.
mental health issues. And on top of that, I think we diluted what okay looks like. We're not able to balance family budgets. We're not able to balance a federal budget.
Mm.
Divorce rates are super high. And I know sometimes divorces are necessary, but I'm just saying, do we just lower the bar? Or do we say, maybe we aren't, and let's get better, let's get healthy? And that's what I would love to encourage our listeners to do is take another look at your workplace and say, do we need to take some steps, not just in revenue and productivity, but are we creating a healthy and safe place for our people to flourish personally as well as professionally?
Well, which makes me think about, while we move so fast, sometimes we have to slow down in order to speed up.
Yeah,
And if
that's
we're
right.
if we're correlating mental health with profits and retention rates, and we're going so fast, and
Yeah,
then we wonder why our profits or our retention rates are down.
yeah,
We talked a lot about mental health here, but let's kind of shift and say, what can we do about it as leaders in this workforce? What are some things that leaders oftentimes miss when it comes to supporting mental health, especially
yeah.
of the many generations? And should they be looking at different things for different generations?
Yeah, I do think so. In fact, let me touch on that real quick and then you can volley back.
Yeah.
The first and foremost thing that I'm going to say is something we said before, but it probably bears repeating. I think we need to keep hearing it and hearing it. I know I do. We've got to begin our leadership journey with others with empathy.
Mm,
Meaning, I probably don't understand everything about their life like I think I do when I stereotyped that 22-year-old yesterday.
mhm,
I probably need to listen and so forth. So I think we need to start with empathy. Certainly, we need to get to resilience and resourcefulness and grit, but I think we need to start with empathy. So, listeners, think about the 5 generations that might be at your workplace. Even let's just take the most popular 4. That I think we're short of time here. So let's start with the baby boomers. They're at retirement age or near it or beyond it. So boomers, think about it right now. If you're leading a baby boomer, they're very likely thinking about retirement savings or lack
mhm,
thereof. And with the very uncertain economy right now and the tariffs and everything else, which we don't know how that's going to turn out, they may be worrying about their ability to retire. Maybe they need to
mhm,
push it back 2 years and push that trip further back into their retirement years. They're also feeling, many, not all, they're feeling irrelevant sometimes.
mhm.
I am
That's
65,
the
and I've
worst.
even had that feeling of, am I relevant now? I look at the young team members under me and or not
Mhm.
under me, but who work alongside me, and I'm going, you're going to pass me up here. And I
Mhm.
want that. But there's that internal feeling of, am I even relevant? Am I a dinosaur on the
Yeah.
job? So just know if you're leading boomers, that might be crossing their mind and
Mm.
they're just not willing to
That
say it.
vulnerability is hard. It's hard.
Gen Xers.
Mhm.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Okay, I'm going
All
to talk
right.
about Gen X and then I've got to have you weigh in on this one. So when I did focus groups, Susan, with Gen Xers, I just fell in love with you all
We're great. I mean,
because
we're a great generation.
you are great
We're
and so
great.
humble too.
Yes.
Yes. Um, so Gen Xers often don't get spoken to. It's the millennials who are gigantic and the boomers who are gigantic as a generation. But Gen Xers, again, may feel like a sandwich generation where they're caring for both sides. And you are, Susan, you're caring for both sides and yourself and the work you're doing. Often caregivers. Burnout can be a huge problem with Gen Xers because they're so oftentimes so responsible. They're going, I dare not leave early. I got to finish this job. And I love that responsibility. I want to hire everybody that with that spirit. But you and I both know sometimes the right thing to do. Maybe it's 8 o'clock. I need to go home. I
Um,
need to get a good night's rest. I'll pick it back up tomorrow morning. Weigh in on this. You're part of that generation.
Gosh, this one's tough for me. Work ethic is there definitely,
Yeah.
but also I would not discount the fact that older Gen Xers are also starting to think, "Am I going to become irrelevant?"
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, you're getting to that point where we are a smaller generation, and now that there's 75% of the workforce are millennials and Gen
Yeah.
Zers,
Yeah.
I'm 54, Tim.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
less than 10 years of retirement. And in my head, I'm thinking, am I leaving a legacy? Am I
Yeah.
significant? Am I being significant or just
Yeah.
successful?
Yeah.
Am I doing the right things? And it's almost a panicked feeling. And at the
Yeah.
same time, feeling guilty that I'm not at home, that I'm not taking care or calling my parents enough
Yes.
or my
Yes.
mother or
Yeah.
maybe some still have grandparents, right? And you're trying to be everything to everybody. And the next thing you turn around and you're like, what just happened to me?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
It's so
and
true.
it happens because you are still fighting to say, "Hey, I am relevant, but
Yeah.
gosh, I have less than 10 years before retirement."
Yeah. Yeah.
And the one thing that I really encourage people, we talk about this as level 2 leadership, is relationships are the foundation. So if you can create those relationships with
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
they will speak to you about it.
Yes. I agree.
They will come to you and talk about it. I recently had this conversation with my leader. I don't want you to think I can't do my job. I'm just overwhelmed right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
He's like,
Yeah.
I already know that. I already know
Yeah.
that. You've got a lot going on, and you're
Yeah.
doing a great job. But
Yeah.
I think we have to get this culture where people feel safe about it. And Gen Xers, I mean, we are being pulled in so
Yeah.
many directions,
Yeah.
especially those of us that started with kids later in life. But some of them have grandparents or grandparents, and they're raising their grandkids.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a client right now that she is raising two grandkids
Yeah.
and trying to be in a new role at work, and she's feeling irrelevant.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It
those things
happens.
happen.
Well, I'm going to say something to you now, and everybody else can listen in. I know that's not easy for you to say. I'm
Yeah.
overwhelmed because you're such a hard worker. The last thing you want to do is cry uncle. You can't do
Mhm.
this. And I'm so glad you heard, of course, it's okay. I,
Yeah.
I know it, you know. Secondly, I need to say, even though you're 54, you look
Oh,
34. Can I
love
just say
see,
that
love
over
it,
the
love
over
it,
the
love
airwaves?
it.
Yes. Okay. All right. Let's move on to millennials.
Okay.
Millennials are the largest generation in the workforce. We have made mention of that already. But
Yes.
if you're still throwing millennials under the bus, Mr. Supervisor
Better
Manager, you
stop.
better stop that. Um, Oftentimes, millennials will be struggling with, I feel behind. My mom and dad at my age were owning a house and, 3 cars or whatever, whatever. And I'm just saying, with my 2 millennial kids, they both have felt that. I
Mm,
remember just a few years ago, my daughter Bethany, who was in her early 30s at the time, said to me, "Dad, am I ever going to be able to afford a home?" And I couldn't say, "Of course, of course." I couldn't
you
say
don't
that.
know. Yeah.
Now the good news is 3 or 4 years later, she has got a townhome. She and her husband have one, and it's so cool.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, they're wondering, will I be able to do the things mom and dad did? And
Mhm.
that's scary to them.
Yeah.
They were told all their life they're full of potential, they're awesome, they're amazing, and now they're not feeling too amazing at 35 sometimes. So we just need to know. Oftentimes they're burdened with credit card debt because they got that credit card in college, which mom and dad said, don't do that, but
And
they
they
did
did.
it, and now they have huge credit card debt, maybe
What
tuition.
about school loans, tuition loans?
Yeah, that's right, and that's going to come up with Gen Z as well. Um, Wage stagnation. You know this, but millennials will go, well, of course I'm not as far enough as my mom and dad, far as my mom and dad were. They made so much more per, the time they were in than I do.
Mhm.
So the wages aren't keeping up with inflation, in other words. You
Mm.
you get that. But just know, all I'm saying is, I'm not saying let's make an excuse. I am saying we need an explanation. And that may be good enough reason to start with empathy on those
Mm.
millennials. All right, so Gen Zers, the last one that we want to cover in the workplace. Many have entered their careers, and just know part of their anxiety might be they've never once had a full-time job.
Mm.
So they may come in a little cocky on the outside, but inside they're going, holy moly,
Don't know.
I don't even know these terms. And I'm afraid somebody's going to gaslight me for not knowing something. I dare not raise my hand in the staff meeting and go, what does P&L mean? So just know they might be afraid that they've never. And by the way, let me just say this, listeners. One of the reasons they may not have had a full time job is mom and dad said all through their education, focus on academics, focus on
Yes, focus
get
on
good
school.
grades. I was working jobs. I think you
I
were
was
too,
too.
Susan,
I
early on.
My
So when
parents
the
used to
career
drive
started,
me, yeah, to a
yes,
job, to waitress at age 14. Yeah.
yeah. And I was throwing newspapers on driveways at
Yeah.
12.
Yeah.
So that helped us. If nothing else, it just helped us realize, oh, I see what work is. And now it just seems so hard to transition from the classroom to the workroom. So one last thought on this one. In a couple of the books that I've done, I share a couple of columns that has been a good handle for older leaders to talk to younger people at work about. I call it Our Scene Today. And the word scene, SCENE, is an acronym. So, listeners, in your mind, make 2 columns, okay? On the left-hand side, write down 5 words that spell the word scene, SCENE, and I'm about to give you those words. On the right-hand column, I want you to write down the unintended consequences of that scenario, what we didn't see coming as a result of our world today, our 21st century culture. Okay. So, real quick, the letter S in scene reminds us we live in a world of speed. No
Mm.
one would debate that. We want everything faster and
Faster.
faster. We want high-speed internet access. We're pacing in front of the microwave oven. It's ridiculous today. Now, think with me. If a kid grows up in a world of speed and they're coming to work now, they're naturally going to be thinking slow is bad.
Mm.
But you and I both know careers usually develop kind of slowly. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not going to be the VP when I'm 25, probably. The letter C in scene. We live in a world of convenience. And I love the modern day conveniences I
Mhm.
enjoy. I wouldn't want to be without them. Quick clicks, that's awesome.
Mhm.
But think about it. If I'm a Gen Zer and I've grown up in a world of convenience, I can assume that hard is bad. But folks, you and I both know things are hard.
Or
Family's hard. Work
I
is hard.
I try to
And
tell
and
my
that
kids that all the time.
yes, I bet you do. And teachers are having to say this.
Mhm.
By the way, the number one phrase that K-12 teachers say they hear from students today, this is too hard. The students are telling their teacher, and of course the teacher's going, what? We've been doing this math equation for decades, Johnny. You
See,
can do it too. But it's just, yeah, it's just, you can see how they would come to that conclusion.
do
The
you think
letter
that's
E. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I
Go ahead.
just want to do you think that's the generational values, like work ethic and loyalty and stuff clashing? Or where do you think that's coming from? This is
I
too
do. I
hard.
think it's from the conveniences we enjoy. They've just been conditioned. Nobody taught them life should be
Yeah.
easy, maybe,
Yeah.
but the conditions have.
Got it.
But I will say this, this is another topic for another podcast. But I heard Gen Zers in my focus group say shortcuts are the new work ethic. I'm not kidding. Now, they explained it and it made a lot of sense to me. They're hackers. They go, if I can get the job done and do it in short amount of time, isn't that all you care about, boss? That I got the job done?
And
So,
older generations would say shortcuts is lazy,
yeah,
right?
that's right. It's so true. So, yeah, it's a little off there. Okay, so where are we? Scene.
We are an E. We're an E.
Letter E in scene. The world that young people are growing up in today is full of entertainment. And by the way, I loved entertainment when I was a teenager, but now it's in our hands. It's
Right there.
always with us. If we're waiting in line at a store, we're pulling out the smartphone, looking at ESPN, email, notifications.
Yes.
But think about it. If I'm growing up in this world of entertainment, I can assume that boring is bad.
Boring is bad.
Now,
I tell
I'll
my daughter
admit when
all
I
the
was
time.
18, I didn't like boring either. But here's what we know now that we didn't know when I was 18. Neuroscientists tell us that our brains actually need boredom.
Mm,
They say it's in times of boredom that we develop creativity and empathy for others. But think about it. If we're living in a world of noise and clutter coming at us all the time, I'm not thinking about anybody else. I'm just trying to survive the day. And we don't
so
need more
good.
people just trying to survive the day. Okay, I'm taking too
I
long on
didn't know
this one.
why. I didn't know why that, but that is so good. My daughter, I'd say the one rule you cannot say is "I'm bored" because I will
Yeah,
give you something to do.
that's right.
I did not know that. That's so good. I hope everybody caught that, that we need boredom for creativity and empathy.
I
Good.
bet you're a good mom. Um, okay, the letter N. By and large, with some exceptions, in middle class America, young people are growing up today in a world of nurture. We want
Mm,
to keep them safe and nurtured, and you're wonderful. And you know that we naturally do that as moms and dads and teachers and coaches. But think about it. If they're growing up in a world of nurture, what message does that relay to them? Risk is
mm,
bad. We've unwittingly, I'm afraid, said to the emerging generation,
mm.
be safe, don't take a risk. But here's what's crazy. 72% of high schoolers in America want to be an entrepreneur, but doesn't that connote taking a little risk? You bet
Mm,
it does. So it's going to be a clash, I'm afraid, unless we teach them. John Maxwell says it best, fail forward. Failing is a good thing. It's part of success.
absolutely. Chasing
All right.
failure.
One last word.
Yes,
I
E.
mean, yeah, the last letter E in scene. So it's speed, convenience, entertainment, nurture. The last letter E is we live today in a world of entitlement.
Mm,
We feel entitled to perks that our grandparents' generation never would have felt entitled to. You and I are sitting in air conditioning right now. My grandparents didn't have air conditioning until they were in their 70s. My
yeah.
goodness gracious. Now, we could throw kids under the bus. Yeah, kids are entitled. Hey, we are too. We are
And
too.
we give it to them, Tim. We give it
Yes,
to
it's
them, though.
true.
We do
That's
it.
right. We give them so many things. Of course, they feel
Mm,
entitled. But think with me, and this is the killer on this one. If they grow up in a world of entitlement, that
mm,
we did this, it's easy for them to assume that labor is bad. I shouldn't have to work for this. This should be part of
mm.
the package, part
Easier.
of the perk, part of the program, part of the scholarship. And I'm telling you, I don't fault the kids for this. I'm saying, what the heck did we do? We raised them in a world of this. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, you and I, we all made this world. So
Yeah.
now we're going to have to intentionally. Here's my point in saying all this. When I look at those unintended consequences, slow, hard, boring, risk, and labor, it dawned on me when I first wrote this out. Aren't those the very elements that grow me into a good worker? When
And
things are a struggle and it's a little hard and it doesn't go very fast? You bet it does. So we've got to intentionally build that in the next generation
mm,
so that they're ready, so that your daughter shows up at work. so far ahead of her peers because she had a mama that said, sweetheart, it's going to be hard and this is a good
Mhm.
thing. It's going to be slow and that's a good thing. So anyway, I probably
And
sound like your grandpa right now, but
no, I mean, but isn't this the things that built the older generations? And
yes,
as
it
you
is.
said it before, good economies create what
Yeah,
bad generation generate, and so it's cyclical. This is all
yeah,
coming back around again, and so we need to now build like the builders and
yes.
and then the boomers. Oh, wow. We could sit here for a long time. I love that scene. I had not heard that from you before, so I've just taken copious notes here. I love it. Let's land this plane because we could talk forever. If
Yeah,
you had one piece of advice to give leaders managing multiple generations, and if you're in the workforce, you're managing multiple generations,
yeah, yeah,
what would it be when it comes to mental health?
yeah. Wow. I would say, I'm going to say a few words, but it's one big thought. I would say be real, be vulnerable, be transparent,
Mm,
and be you. I fully realize that sounds cliche, but I think if bosses are willing to say, wow, this is a tough day, isn't it? Wow, we're going to have to really go out. I think that people are going, oh, thank God. I thought I was the only wimp in the room, that sort of thing.
yeah.
So when we lead with empathy because we're willing to be transparent, we absolutely, well, the people that we lead are absolutely identifying with us. So I'll tell a quick story that illustrates. Years ago, um, I was talking to a missionary and a clinic. He had gotten his doctorate, PhD and MD. So he thought, I'm fully equipped to go to a tribe in Africa. I'm not even going to mention the nation, but he went over there and built. Man, he raised money for a building and a clinic and everything else. And then on Sunday, he was going to hold church. Well, he got over there and he could not find anybody that was wanting to come to his church. Now, granted, they were black and he was white, but he felt like I'm trying to love them and care for them, and I'm treating them at the clinic, but they weren't showing up on Sunday. Well, about a year passes by, and lo and behold, the son of this missionary doctor passes away, and they couldn't get him to a hospital that had the treatments that
Mm,
would have cured him. Well, you can imagine this doctor and his wife were both devastated. And the doctor asked some of the people of the village to help, build a casket and bury their son. And when they put this coffin into the ground, the doctor slash preacher motioned to the people to hold off, and he just put his head on the son's coffin and he just began to cry. He just wept. And as you can imagine, it's what we would do with our children if it happened.
yeah.
Well, one of the villagers got over closer and bent over and looked into the man's face with tears coming down his cheeks. And then he took off and ran back to the village. This is where the story gets kind of powerful. His message back in the village was simply this: the white man, he cries like we do. The next Sunday, the church was full,
Mm,
but it wasn't because he was a better preacher, better theology, better doctor. It was because they needed to find a leader who could also identify with where they were.
mm.
So I think this whole mental health thing, maybe that's just a great story to cap it off. We just got to make sure that we're caring for our people, not just for the revenue. And I think that's going to be a turn for the better. Yeah.
And Tim, what a great story to end on. And that's one reasons we formed this podcast where our goal is to build the bridges, not the walls in the workplace, develop leaders to become better leaders to the multi generations. As we close out today, if you're interested in knowing how to bring this type of training to your organization, or maybe you need some coaching, visit us at maxwellleadership.com/generations at work. You can also download a free Generations at Work playbook. And we appreciate you being here with us today on the podcast Generations at Work. And we will see you next time. Thanks, guys.